Okay, my YouTube people, this is what it takes to install a cam on a nose cone shovel or an Evo. If you have your old cam, you want to press your old gear off because it's already been sized to the pinion gear. They have to have 2000s backlash. If they're looser than that, they'll click, and if they're tight, they'll whine like crazy. And if they're tight and they're whining, they'll eventually ruin the bearings and ruin the bushing on the cam. So you don't want that. This is the new Andrews EV27 cam I'm installing. The coating that you see is something that Andrews puts on there to prevent corrosion. Now, I'm not sure if you can see it on camera or not, but Andrews puts 2 timing marks on the cam gear. So before you press your old one off, you have to put 2 marks to be able to get it back on in the right position. So what I do is I clean this surface off with brake clean, then I get machinist dye and put some machinist dye on it before I scribe lines. Now that the machinist dye is dry, you just put your straight edge here, right there, and scribe a line right up it. And I just do the same for the other side. Like that. And there you go. 2 lines, just like the factory does it. That gets the backlash correct. Now that you have your line scribed on both cams, you press your factory gear off your factory cam, and you press the Andrews gear off of the Andrews cam, and then you take your factory gear and press it back onto your Andrews cam, and that gets you the right backlash. I'll show you the finished job on that when it's pressed on, but I don't have the press here at my house. So this is what I was talking about. This is the Andrews cam with the factory Harley cam gear pressed on it. And then I put the Andrews cam gear on the old factory cam. And you can see, like I said, I'm sure it shows up where you can see the marks. I also cleaned this in solvent, so most of that red machinist dye is gone. And my marks are pretty much gone. I also got all that corrosion protection off of the cam. It's ready to be installed, and I'll show you that. First thing I like to do is I take 2 pieces of all thread that I already have, and then I screw them into the block like this. And that allows you to easily put the gasket and the cover on. Then you just slip the gasket on, and it holds it right there for you. Next thing you do is you want to use the breather gear. This is a pretty basic engine, so I did not get the S&S stainless one. If you're running a high performance engine, I highly recommend that. If you are running the S&S breather gear, they like the end play to be less than 15 thousandths. And the way you do it is you get an old cam gasket, because this one's going to have some crush to it. And you put the straight edge across here, and then you come down here with a feeler gauge to check it. Before you install any breather gear, I'll make sure to coat it with some oil. This is the breather gear that I used. It's V-Twin manufacturing part number 12-1531. The Harley number is 35310-82A. I always leave the part numbers that I use in the description. Want to make sure you get oil on the back side of these teeth on the gear. I even take some oil and go through the bore with it. With the black gear, it's hard to see the timing mark, so I just get a white paint stick and mark it. Now you just slip the gear in. To get the shim to stay on the gear, I just put a little bit of either grease or Vaseline on the back side of it. Not much. And that'll hold it there so it doesn't fall while you're getting the cover on. You can see I did the same thing with the timing mark on the pinion gear. And of course I did it with the timing marks on the cam. This is the style paint stick I use. They're very inexpensive at any hardware store. Anytime you have any of these cam chests open, you should always replace your cam bearing. And you always want to use the Torrington bearing, which has a lot more needles than the stock bearing does. I'm sure at this point, if you have an Evo, that's been done. And now I make sure to put some assembly lube on that bearing. I just take a good amount of it, put it on there, and I try and pack it into the bearing. Now the assembly lube has been expertly installed. Next thing you want to do is install this keyed spacer. It can only go one way. And if you look, there's a diagonal on the block right there that matches this diagonal. So it goes in just like that. And then you put your shim in, and this shim sets your end play. So right now, this is 700 thousandths or 7/10 of an inch. And these go in like this. You put your keyed one in first, then this shim. But the easiest way to do this is to put them on the cam first. This will probably all have to come apart if the end play is not set right, and that's 10 to 15 thousandths end play on the cam. In case the shim is the correct one, I'll line up the timing marks and won't have to pull it back apart if it's lined up right. So you can see I have the pinion mark right, but the breather gear is wrong. So it's easier just to pull the breather gear out and then to turn it that one tooth. So now you can clearly see that the timing mark on the cam goes into the breather gear timing mark, and the timing mark on the cam for the pinion goes into the pinion gear at the exact right spot. Before you put your cam cover on, you want to make sure to get a little assembly lube on the cam and on the pinion shaft. And I'll also make sure to put it in on both these bushings. So the gasket's on, the gears are aligned, and now you just take and put the cam cover on those pieces of all thread for the alignment, like that. Make sure that the cam starts into the bushing nice and easy, and it does. You can rotate the engine as you just saw me do, and that helps it slide on. I like to tap it down with a plastic mallet a little bit, that it's all the way down. And now you start your cam bolts. When I final torque this, I will put Loctite on these. And you take the all thread out. Now you get your 3/16 Allen socket and just bring them in by hand. And you want to tighten across from each other, and you want to torque in a crisscross pattern. Per the Harley manual, gear case cover screws 90 to 120 inch-pounds. I like to come up in 2 or 3 steps, so the first time I'm going to do it, I'm going to be at 40 inch-pounds. Now I like to go around a second time, just make sure they're all at 40, and you can see that one turned quite a bit. Okay, now that they're all at 40, I'm going to come up to 80. And again, I'm going to go opposite of each other, and I'll go around a second time. And the last torque is going to be at 110 inch-pounds. And I always go around 3 times on the last torque, just to make sure everything is evenly torqued. So the next thing you have to do is you have to check that the end play on the cam is correct. I like to get a screwdriver and I put it down in this slot. That's an oil slot for the bearing. Now I just give it a little twist, and that makes sure that you push the cam towards the nose cone cover. Now the next thing you have to do is you slip a feeler gauge in between the spacer with the ears and the shim spacer there. And that should be 10 to 15 thousandths on an Evo. I'm going to start with 10 thousandths. And you can see 10 goes in there. Now I'm going to go straight to 15 thousandths. You can see that 15 will not go down in there. So let's check it again with 13. Yes, 13 slips down in there, but definitely has a drag. Now we'll see if we can get 14 down in there. 14 goes in, but it's pretty tight. So I would call it 13.5 or 13. So I would call that 13.5. So that's good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out these Allen screws one at a time, put some Loctite on them, and then put them back in and torque them up to the 110 inch-pounds. Now I pull the cover bolts out one at a time and put some blue Loctite on them. And now put it back in and torque it right back to the 110 inch-pounds. Then I'll do all the rest of them. I should have mentioned earlier, but my cam bolt threads were very clean because I wire wheeled them. And when the block was apart, it got hot tanked, so it got all the factory Loctite off of everything. But if you have to pull this apart, it's really important that you wire wheel the threads on the bolts, because you won't get a proper torque if you don't clean out that Loctite. Also, use some brake clean and clean the threads on the block to make sure you get as much of it as you can out of there too. So this is the full assembly of the cam and how you go about measuring and checking it. This was the full assembly of the cam gear case. It's how to line up the timing marks, check the end play on the cam, checking the end play if you use an S&S breather gear, and putting paint on the timing marks. The one thing I forgot to video while doing the cam install was me putting in the cam seal. You can see I used some high temperature RTV around the outside edge of the seal. I also, before installing the seal, put some oil on the lip of the seal so that it would slide over the cam easier. Since I don't have any special tools, I put it in while it was in the motor. I got a socket the size of the seal that was 1/2 inch drive and an extension, and just tapped it right in with a plastic hammer. Sometimes that's how it goes with video, and you just forget to record stuff. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please hit the thumbs up button. It don't cost you anything and it helps my channel. Also, please subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you watching, and if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments, and I always get back to people